dices.
Ándale, exactamente.
Pues muy buenas tardes, good evening, bienvenidos a la Embajada de México. Agradecemos su asistencia a esta conferencia de prensa que ofrecerá la Subsecretaria de Comercio Exterior, María de la Mora, en la cual nos comentará algunos de los asuntos que ha tratado a lo largo de su programa de visita aquí a la ciudad de Washington. Welcome to the Embassy of Mexico. We appreciate you joining us today to this press conference with Undersecretary Luz María de la Mora, who has shared with us some time of her busy agenda, and will share with us as well some information regarding the different activities she has undertaken today these days while in Washington. Sin más preámbulo, por favor, subsecretaria.
Muchísimas gracias, Víctor. Buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por convocar a esta reunión con medios. Si les parece bien, podemos hacer la conferencia en inglés o es necesario, como ustedes lo vean, por términos de saber si todo el mundo entiende español o si quieren lo podemos hacer en inglés. If you want to, we can have this session in English. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do it in English, and then if there are questions in Spanish, I will be happy to answer those questions in Spanish. Well, I think that we're today in a very important day. It's a historic date. It's the vote in the U.S. Senate, and for us, it's really very good news. For Mexico, having seen a long process of negotiation, really that started in 2017, and today seeing the conclusion in the U.S. Senate is a very, very important message. It's a very important news. It's a very positive news. As you know, for Mexico, the USMCA is the way to integrate into our most important trading partner. It's a way of integrating into the North American economy. For Mexico, the USMCA is a key element to ensure competitiveness of North America, but also to ensure that Mexico is part of that competitive region. The reason why we are here this week, it's not only an incredible coincidence that we're here when the Senate approves this agreement, but we are here because the Ministry of Economy is responsible for the implementation of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. In that sense, we need to make sure that when the agreement becomes effective, probably around July of this year, we will be ready to make sure that all of the provisions that are in the agreement, all of the commitments that Mexico made are fully implemented or are in the process of being implemented. For that reason, we're here because we know that after Mexico approved the agreement, the U.S. Congress, the House, and the Senate approved the agreement, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks, months, the Parliament in Canada will also approve the agreement. We know that the deadline for implementation is coming soon, and we need to be ready to make that happen. Our counterpart, the USTR, the Department of Commerce, are in charge also of coordinating the implementation of the agreement. In Mexico, the Ministry of Economy has been working for quite some time. I would say during 2019, we worked in order to coordinate with other agencies to make sure that Mexico will have the kind of legislation that we need to have in order to integrate into the Mexican legislation all of the commitments that we made under the NAFTA. We are working with the Senate, we are working with the Chamber of Deputies in Mexico to pass legislation that really reflects the commitments that we have. Examples of this legislation have to do with intellectual property, plans variation, copyrights, enforcement, and a whole host of questions that have to do with also administrative issues. We also have, in addition to the work that we're doing in Mexico at the domestic level in order to make sure that our legal framework is consistent with our USMCA commitments. We also need to work with Canada and the US on a trilateral basis to make sure that we have in place the provisions that need to be in place from an administrative level and also from a legal perspective to make sure that we're all on the same standing. I want to give a few examples of what we're working on right now. The uniform regulations, for example, that are provided in Chapter 4, Chapter 5, and Chapter 6 of USMCA, where we have to be working on specifics on how the rules of origin, customs procedures will be implemented among the three of us. We have built an interagency task force in Mexico with other agencies like Customs, Agriculture, the Mexican Institute for Intellectual Property Protection, to make sure that all of the commitments are in place, but we also need to make sure that the commitments that are provided in the USMCA can be enforced equally among the three parties, Mexico, Canada, and the US. We are working on a timeline to make sure that we are ready by hopefully July 1st or around that date to make sure that we are ready, all of us, the agencies in Mexico, to implement USMCA. There are other areas, for example, dispute settlement, where we need to have the rules that will apply for the implementation of the dispute settlement mechanism. We need to define the roster of panelists that will be participating in any dispute that may arise. We hope that there will be no disputes, but nonetheless, we need to make sure to have everything in place. So this is a trilateral effort. This is a coordination effort. This is more of an administrative part of the implementation of USMCA. But we really have a few more months, 5 months probably, to get everything in place. So that's the reason why we are here in Washington to work on the implementation, to identify the areas in which we need to work specifically, to define what needs to be done, to establish a timeline, and to make sure that whenever we conclude our legislative processes for approval and we notify each other that we have concluded our domestic legislative processes, we will be ready for the implementation of USMCA. We are here working with our partners in USTR, US Department of Commerce, US Department of Agriculture, and some other agencies that are responsible for the right implementation. And our goal is that when the time comes for implementation, we're all ready and it's a smooth implementation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, subsecretaria. Si hubiera preguntas por parte de los medios, la subsecretaria generosamente ha accedido a responder preguntas de medios. If there were any questions by press, please. CQ, please.
Thank you. Ellen Ferguson, CQ roll call. How far along do you think you are at this point, or are you just sort of at the very preliminary in trying to address these various areas? And you have an ambitious goal within Mexican law of establishing this labor court system. Is that going to run kind of parallel to some other things, or is that the top priority?
Thank you. Well, I would like to divide this question into 3 answers. The first one has to do with the legislative package that we call Paquete Temec, or the USMCA package in Mexico. It's a set of legislations that need to be adjusted in order for us to be able to comply with our commitments. This legislative package is something that we have been working for a year with other agencies in the Mexican government as well as with Congress. We feel very confident that this legislative package of changes or new laws in the Mexican Congress will be approved in the next ordinary session from February till the end of April. So we know from the Economia perspective that we have done our job with respect to the changes that need to be made in order to internalize the commitments that we made. The second point has to do with uniform regulations for the actual implementation of chapters 4, 5, and 6 of USMCA. We have worked somehow with Canada and the US, the USTR and our counterpart in Canada, to define how we will work on them. We have already a good starting point. We have identified those areas in which need most work. However, we also recognize that there's a lot of technical work that needs to take place. We are at full swing right now in terms of developing a work plan for these 5 months in order for us to have those regulations in place. The challenge, of course, is that we have new rules of origin specifically for the auto sector, new methodologies that we need to develop. This is a whole new set of rules that we have never tried in the past. So we're going to have to be very creative and we're going to have to work very hard. And that's where Economia is putting a lot of its attention. And the third part of the question has to do with the labor reform. As you know, the labor reform in Mexico provides for phasing periods. And that's also included on Annex 23A of the USMCA. The phasing period provides for different types of activities that the Labor Ministry will have to implement throughout these 4 years. You know that one of the areas in which there's a transition towards a new way of implementing labor justice will start in September of this year. We are in the process of making this a reality, but that's part of the reform itself, no? And that is what we are expecting will take place. The resources are being allocated. The Ministry of Trade is working along with the Ministry of Labor in order for the labor reform to be fully implemented in these 4 years and complying with the transition periods. We're all interested in complying with our own legislation because this is part of President López Obrador's agenda. So we know that this is a very important transformation. It's a structural reform, but it's a structural reform that provides for its own timelines. And we know that that is also incorporated into the provisions that are in the USMCA. Thank you.
Por favor, Televisa.
Fernanda Caso. Hemos escuchado que parte de las tareas de implementación requieren regulación, modificaciones a la regulación, modificaciones a las leyes, pero también hay una serie de implementaciones que requieren otro tipo de acciones que implican pues una carga presupuestal importante, ¿no? Supervisiones, auditorías, instancias de resolución de conflictos. En el presupuesto de este año no vemos todavía reflejado este presupuesto. ¿Lo podríamos ver a corto plazo, que se hiciera una asignación específica o probablemente hasta el próximo año en el siguiente ejercicio fiscal?
Sí. Contestar en español. Tu pregunta es muy buena y creo que es muy pertinente aclarar que el presupuesto está asignado en función de la entrada en vigor y la implementación de las diferentes etapas de la reforma laboral. Entonces, a medida en que esta reforma vaya tomando forma y se vayan cumpliendo los plazos, es donde el presupuesto va a ir entrando. Lo que sí te puedo asegurar es que hay un compromiso del gobierno federal, hay un compromiso de esta administración por otorgarle los recursos necesarios financieros, humanos, para poder implementar correctamente esta reforma. También hemos estado en conversaciones con nuestras contrapartes en Canadá y en Estados Unidos, con el BID, por ejemplo, para obtener mecanismos para tener cooperación técnica y facilitar la capacitación, que es parte de la transformación que implica esta reforma laboral.
Gracias. Si hubiera alguna otra pregunta, por favor, el Universal, Víctor Sancho.
Gracias. Durante su conferencia ha hablado de la fecha de 1 de julio como una meta prevista. No sé si la consideran como una fecha muy dura o qué es lo que quieren tener seguro para esa fecha y que podría estar pendiente un poco por encima alrededor del mes de julio. Gracias.
Sí, claro. Mira, la razón por la que estamos, bueno, yo creo que podría ser el 1 de julio es porque en este momento Canadá es el país que falta para su aprobación. Canadá tiene que pasar nuevamente la legislación, ya la introdujo en diciembre pasado, ahora tiene que ir a la Cámara Baja y tiene que ir al Senado del Parlamento. Cada Cámara debe de tener 3 lecturas. Nosotros hemos conversado con nuestras contrapartes en Canadá y si bien este proceso va a requerir una discusión por una cuestión de política interna en Canadá, la información que tenemos es que no está en cuestión si va a pasar, la cuestión es cuándo podría pasar. Son 21 días de sesión legislativa que tiene que darse en un plazo de 21 días que tiene que salir. Entonces, siendo conservadores y considerando que se tomaran todo el tiempo que requieren para poder hacer la discusión, creemos que tal vez para abril podría concluirse el proceso de aprobación. ¿Esto qué significa? Que el Tratado México-Estados Unidos-Canadá señala que el acuerdo entrará en vigor el primer día del tercer mes posterior a que hayamos recibido la última notificación de que hemos concluido nuestros procesos jurídicos internos. Suponiendo que esto se diera en abril, entonces tenemos que el tercer mes siguiente es julio, el 1 de julio. Entonces, por eso creemos que podría estar en vigor en esa fecha. Claro, no es asegurado, pero creemos que alrededor de esa fecha podría darse. Entonces, nosotros estamos trabajando en un margen de 5 meses, de febrero a junio, en el sentido de saber que en esos 5 meses tenemos que tener listas las reglamentaciones uniformes, las reglas modelo, las reglas de procedimiento para los mecanismos de solución de diferencias, los rosters de panelistas, y tenemos que tener en vigor los mecanismos que aseguren que lo que está previsto en el TEMEC pueda estar en vigor a partir del 1 de julio. Esto, además, creo que ya es momento, o sea, ya es importante para nosotros también tener el acuerdo en vigor, ya es momento de pasar a la siguiente fase. La siguiente fase es el aprovechamiento del acuerdo, el asegurarle a los inversionistas, a los productores, a los exportadores, a los operadores económicos, que aquí están las reglas y ahora a aprovecharlas, ¿no? A hacer que el Tratado México-Estados Unidos-Canadá haga de la región una región competitiva, una región que pueda seguir siendo vigente a las inversiones, que pueda seguir haciendo frente a la competencia que viene de Asia, y para nosotros sí es muy importante ya poder dar el paso hacia la siguiente etapa.
Pues muy bien, si no hubiera más preguntas, if there's no more questions, CQ, Ellen, yes.
One, in English, that question, that response. 2, you mentioned you happen to be here during a historic point. I'm wondering if Mexico has some sort of assessment as to whether there might be some, on the U.S.-China agreement, if there might be some, if there's a benefit potentially for Mexico, or do you worry that perhaps some of the exports that the United States now sends to Mexico may be diverted in order to make these purchase agreements? And are you also concerned that maybe because of the purchase agreements, I don't know how much Mexico exports or what you export, if anything, to China, if that will make it difficult for market access for Mexico?
Well, thank you for your question. I think it's really amazing what's happening this week. There's the USMCA approved in the Senate. There's this phase 1 agreement between the US and China, there's this industrial subsidies agreement between the EU, Japan, and the United States that sends very good signals with respect to certainty. I would have to say that the potential benefit of this agreement between between China and the United States is that it gets rid of the uncertainty that the industry, the economic operators, the economy has been facing. And I think that that is very positive, not only for Mexico, but for the whole economy. We understand that this is phase one agreement. We need to look into the details of the agreement because we know what has been published. We need to really read the document which was published only today. We know that there's going to be a phase two agreement. As you know, the USMCA, when it is in place, will give us the possibility of asking the US, Canada and Mexico can ask the US to take a look at what they're negotiating with China. But I think that we need to look at the China-US-Mexico equation as a partnership in which Mexico and the US can jointly address the Chinese market. Mexico is a powerful manufacturing powerhouse, and we know that with this agreement, the certainty that it provides, it will allow trade to continue to flow. For Mexico, China is our third largest export market and our second largest trading partner. To China, we export a lot of agricultural products, especially fresh produce, beverages, some kind of meats, pork, but we also export manufacturing products. We export automobiles, we export auto parts, we export machinery, equipment, electronics. So our export profile to the Chinese market is also a very diverse export profile that is similar to what we have with the US. So I think that at the end of the day, having an agreement between China and the US will help also the Mexican economy because it will get rid of this uncertainty that was affecting the market. And I think that since Mexico and the US are productively integrated, we have more opportunities to export via the US or from Mexico, integrating US components. So I think that this is a very positive sign, and we take this as a very good news also for Mexico.
Gracias, subsecretaria. De no haber más preguntas, daremos por concluida la sesión de hoy y esperamos que la visita concluya con más éxitos. Secretaria,
Muchas gracias.
te agradecemos por tu tiempo y gracias por asistir.
Gracias a ustedes. Buenas tardes.